when you're working on the teams that have to manage that vulnerability management program and you understand, you can try your best to make sure every system is updated immediately and quickly because that's what we're trying to report, but it doesn't always translate. And I don't know the best way to get people into the room with the leadership teams to show maybe we need to work with maybe development teams and say, I understand that you have projects, but here is how these vulnerabilities could impact you, not just you, but the entire organization. I'm hoping that this isn't something that is immediately implemented in organizations, but we have AI browsers that are being created. And so when I think about now I have this Chrome extension that's on a browser that has AI, and we know for a fact, like the security is well behind the AI. So now I have a browser that can take action based on some commands that somebody has sent to the browser. And I've already given my browser extension God privileges. I think you can tell I'm extremely uncomfortable, but we've had many people come on the show who say, what does it matter if you feel like, you're failing at what you're doing at your podcast? You're showing up. You don't have to show up and be perfect immediately. And you can still help people. You can still be able to provide some inspiration to the people who are having maybe some of the same struggles that you have.
In today's digital-first world, protecting customer data and business operations has never been more critical. Our guest today is Tiffiny Bryant, Information Security Analyst at Shipt, where she helps secure one of the nation's leading same-day shopping and delivery platforms. Beyond her day job, she has taken a master's at UCF and also hosts the Stats on Stats podcast, providing insights to technology professionals. With her diverse background, I'm excited to tap into her insights today. Welcome to the show, Tiffiny.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for having me on your show this week.
It really is a treat to have you on the show. I really enjoyed my time on the Stats on Stats podcast. And if you haven't seen it, please go out and look at it. It's a really good show. Well, let's start on some career journey and military background. I kind of want to find out about your transition from military service into cybersecurity. I get mixed messages. I feel like it should be natural, but definitely it's not straightforward. Tell us about your journey and what drew you specifically to cybersecurity field.
Okay, yeah. So, John, I can remember the day that the possibility IT could be a role for me in the military. I was a recruiter in Virginia Beach, and my reenlistment NCO walked past me and he asked, what do I need to do in order to get you to sign these papers? And jokingly, I said, if you can help me transfer from human resources to information technology, then I'd be willing to sign the paperwork. Not more than 2 months later, he showed back up and he said, I got you 25 Bravo and I got you a bonus. I almost fell out my seat because at the time, I only remember one person who was a female who did tech work. And here I was now getting ready to sign up to be an IT tech myself and start fixing my own computer. So it was actually not expected, but that decision actually led me to Augusta, Georgia, where I did my tech training. And then from there, my first duty station was at Fort Hood, Texas. And that's where I did my help desk role. So, getting to learn the network. And from there, I went to DC. From my deployment in Afghanistan, I went to Tampa, and that's where I ended my military career. Now, as I was getting ready to transition, Jordan. So Jordan had moved to Tampa as well, and she was working at the help desk. And shortly after, she moved over to the Security Operations Center. And I'm starting to look at, opportunities outside of the Army and trying to submit my resumes. And I started asking her, what did you do? How on earth did you jump right into this contracting role here at US CENTCOM? And she was coming from DC. So obviously, she kind of knew the ropes. And we got to talking and she told me about the certification she had, which was Certified Ethical Hacker, by the way. And that was one I didn't have. So I talked to my leadership team about my goals. And they mentioned there was a training right there in Tampa that I could take at this place called New Horizons, and I could get my certified ethical hacker if I stuck with it. So I went, did the training. I studied for about 2 months, I think, and then I took the certification. So with that certification in hand, when Jordan told me somebody left her team, I handed her my resume and a bunch of prayers. And I ended up being able to get the interview. I made it through the interview, and my very first role in cybersecurity was at the Security Operations Center at US CENTCOM.
That is awesome. That's a great story. Going from HR, which is totally not technical, in enlistment, role, and then moving in IT, I think that was probably a stark contrast in like your day-to-day work. Is that true?
It was, because in HR, I was that person who was always breaking something on my computer because I didn't exactly. I had no idea what I was doing, but there were a bunch of menus on the screen, and I'm like, oh, they must be meant for me to click them. Yeah. So I think that's why it was so interesting for me that, there I was now going to be the second person I knew, second female I knew that was actually coming to help people when they were frustrated with their computers.
That's good. And then when you were in IT, you were on the help desk. So you were already dealing with the users. Now you're dealing with the users that you used to be one of, right?
Yep.
Was that a frustrating experience?
No. And it's probably because I was that person. So for me,
you had a lot of empathy.
Yeah, I am that person. I'm always thinking about the way that people gave me grace whenever I had frustrations or I had questions or I needed help. So many people just poured into me and just didn't get frustrated. They just showed me true grace. And so, I absolutely was just like, here, let me show you what I'm doing and why I'm doing this. And it worked out.
You know what I like about your story about your role from HR to IT is that you were advocating for yourself. You were thinking, this wasn't what was passionate for you. Maybe you did have passion for that enlistment work, but you knew that there was something else that you wanted to do, and you advocated for yourself, and the opportunity came, right? And then later on, as you try with cyber, you advocate for yourself again. You go out and you reach out into the community, the people that you know, and you learn about what it took to move from one role to another role. And there you go. The opportunity comes again. And I think that, again, it is about community. It is about putting yourself out there. It is about advocating for yourself. And I think, like I said, I think it's a great story. It's one of the easier stories that I've heard, I think, from other military people. You said you were 25 Bravo, right? I worked with the Navy for many years, so I don't know what 25 Bravo is, right? But to all the Army people, I'm sure they all know what 25 Bravo is. But to the listeners, who aren't in the military, what is 25 Bravo? Educate us a little bit.
Yeah, so that is the military occupational specialty. That's the code for information technology specialist. And those are the people who I was that person who show up when you're having issues on your system. If you can't connect to the printer, call me.
Okay, great. So the Security Operations Center is actually, I think, one of the places that I'm most passionate about, for my own journey. And so I really appreciate the effort that it takes for people to grind through the Security Operations Center, and because I think at the beginning it really is a grind, but there's a lot of learning, just like being on the help desk. I spent time on the help desk as well. That was definitely part of my IT career journey also a long, long time ago. But I think that those roles actually do help you for like later career paths. It's like foundational understanding, having empathy for your users, understanding what kind of trouble they're going through. Going into the Security Operations Center, how did they get there? How did they become part of this phishing attack that they executed successfully on behalf of the attacker? As a fellow podcast host on Stats, right? You understand the challenges of breaking down complex technical topics. I think you probably had to deal with that both in your help desk and your Security Operations Center roles. But you have to break down those technical topics to meet the different audience needs. How do you approach explaining cybersecurity risks to non-technical stakeholders? And what have you learned from your podcast experience that helps in those conversations?
How do I approach it? John, I ask a lot of questions. And I think the podcast has actually helped me be able to, really dig deep into those questions. But something I've learned is you also, when you start asking a lot of questions, you can sometimes create more frustration than you do solutions. So it's always important to give that space to have two-way conversations. I start with the questions, make sure that every stakeholder that's in the room with me knows that my priority is not just being able to bring the security or get us back into operationals, back up to operations, but it's also to make sure that they're able to accomplish their mission. And that means being able to understand that the finance officer may have some questions that I wasn't prepared for. And if I ask the questions, it helps me to prepare in advance, or it helps me to better understand that I don't want to talk about encryptions, algorithms, and cryptography when I lead a meeting. It's much better for me to go in there and say, look, here are the systems that could be impacted. These are the routes that it would take to get to another system in our organization. And also, did you know the data that's on the system that they've actually impacted? If not, here's what that data could mean to our organization. So realistically, I think it's something we do all the time, right? When I talk to my sister about what I do for tech, I don't talk to her about logic and frameworks. I talk to her about that person in my company who might have gotten an email that says, hey, you didn't pay your tolls, or hey, I want to be a candidate for this job. And so they sent a resume. And so it's my job to be able to be the one that can go in and help understand whether that person clicked on the link to pay their toll, and then they use their email address and their password. That is also the email address and password that they use to get into systems in our organization. Or did they download something? Because, like me, I like to click on a lot of stuff. So you have to be able to understand what that is. Because if I talk to her about anything else, my sister would probably just disconnect at the beginning of that conversation, and that'd be the end of it. So I think it's always about understanding the people that are in the room, what their mission is, what they need to accomplish, and then being able to say, hey, that's important to me as well. There's a unique icebreaker that we use for the podcast, and you've been there for that. And I think what I've learned from that is once you strip away kind of the titles and the roles and the position from people, and they can see your human side and they're willing to show you their human side as well, it also takes away some of the apprehension people have when they go into a incident response situation, because that's always a stressful situation when you hear that there's somebody that may have gotten into your systems in your organization.
Yeah, because of something you did, some action you took, right? So it is, and I've definitely been in those conversations. If people start fearing for their jobs and their livelihood in these conversations, they feel like it's going to impact their families. And I guess depending on the culture of the company and how serious of an offense it is, I guess it could, right? But there definitely is an empathy part of it, which I'll tell you that I've probably failed many times at providing empathy there. But I do think that, with non-technical stakeholders, right, people that we're working with every day, there's more of them than there are of us, the technical side people. And, especially in leadership in cyber and people that are disconnected from the business, they stop realizing that those people are the business. They're the ones that are kind of trying to move along that value chain to deliver whatever outcomes that, our customers want so that they can have sales and renew sales and those kinds of things. Those people are just kind of trying to keep the business going. And, our job is to try to make it safe for them. But talking to them about technology or, like you said, encryption algorithms and, whatever, or making them feel bad because they clicked a link when we had technical controls that failed that allowed the phishing email to get to them so that they could click. I think that when we talk to them, I think it is about non-judgmental attitudes. It's empathy. It's those things that hopefully they come away from the experience thinking that we're a partner, right? That we're just being helpful. I feel like we're firefighters, right? Meaning that, there's something that happens and we have to react. And then we go through the root cause analysis and we try to figure out what in our program failed that allowed this action to happen. And a lot of it is like talking to users about how their experience goes, and then take those insights and saying, do we have training programs? Do we have policy programs, policy problems? Do we have training gaps in our training? Do we have gaps in our technical controls? Are there things that we should be doing better? And, behind the scenes, trying to make a safer environment for our users. Do you feel like that we're doing a good job from a cybersecurity perspective in hitting those marks, or are there areas where we think, or that you think that we could be doing better?
That's an interesting question, John. When you say, are there better things that we can be doing to help our users? This month is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And yes, we do training, but I think it really comes down to, you mentioned this before, people are able to click through kind of that training, but the people sometimes that matter the most, who are going to be doing some of the larger roles in your organization, we have to find a way to explain to them the vulnerabilities that we have in our organization, right? I think leadership teams sometimes feel like, okay, we have a vulnerability management process in place. We have a path to remediation for any vulnerability that shows up. And yes, we do. I remember from the military, we used to have plans of actions and milestones. And even then, the reason that we had to have, something like plans of actions and milestones is because there is always going to be teams who cannot meet those needs and those demands of the vulnerability management plan immediately. And I think when you're working on the teams that have to manage that vulnerability management program, and you understand, you can try your best to make sure every system is updated immediately and quickly, because that's what we're, trying to report, but it doesn't always translate. And I don't know the best way to get people into the room with the leadership teams to show, maybe we need to work with maybe development teams and say, I understand that you have projects, but here is how these vulnerabilities could impact you, not just you, but the entire organization. Because maybe the more depth they have in terms of understanding those vulnerabilities, then the more invested they'll be in, finding the time to kind of help ensure that we don't take months in order to resolve some vulnerabilities. And this is not once I was in the military and this happened and, now I'm in a new organization. I've seen, you probably saw this recently, Oracle was impacted by a legacy system that needed a patch. And, maybe they thought because there wasn't a proof of concept out there, they might be okay, but we're not fully protected. And I think that vision doesn't always translate across from the people who are actually practicing and working on the vulnerability management plans to the leadership teams.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the question that pops in my mind when we talk about development teams and vulnerability management is always, who's going to do that? Is that really a problem, right? It's an actual vulnerability. We have documentation that shows it and whatever to do it. But I think the question is, two questions I always get is that really true? Is it really a vulnerability? And two, the other question is, why would someone do that anyway? Right. And I think that's the part that always kind of kills me is like, people have proclivities. I don't know why hackers do what they do, but they do it. And, and it's a risk to the business. And just the diversity of people and what they want and what they like and what they have access to and how they want to feed their families. I think you can't understand the combinations and permutations of why hackers do what they do. But again, I think it is good to help educate the developers about their systems, the systems that are near them, right? Meaning, maybe it's not their system that's a problem, but their system is connected to a system that does have sensitive data on it. And, that's creates like a bridge or a nexus between the system, the crown jewels that we're trying to protect in their system, and getting them to kind of understand the how important their system is in the world and inside your space. I think that does take time and changes in culture to kind of impact. Which, I think you're working in e-commerce and platform security. Just even from our conversation, I can kind of tell you're kind of dealing with the engineering side of the world today. You talked about poems, and poems are really, I've not really seen them outside the military. It is kind of a discipline. We know that we have plans of actions and milestones, that there's threats and vulnerabilities that we can't get to today, or that architecturally we may not be able to solve. So we might have to take that into the future and solve it at a different time. Thinking about military discipline and that pattern translating into cybersecurity work, what skills can you share that you have successfully brought across from your military days?
I think I'm going to start with a question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. What do you remember from September 11th, 2001?
Wow. What do I remember from September 11th, 2001? I remember worrying about my son had just been taken to school. My older son had just been taken to school. I didn't even know what was happening. My now ex-wife, she had ran in the house and was screaming, because something was happening, and she was scared. Right. So I turned on the TV and, started seeing what was, going on. It was very, very, unnerving. Right. I mean, not understanding, not knowing if my son at school was safer where he was, or if I needed to go pick him up. There was other things going on at the trade centers, and there was things going on at the, happening around the Pentagon, other things that were going on. So we didn't know how big of an attack it was. It was a very unnerving experience.
You were in New York, in that area?
No, I was actually in Austin, Texas.
Gotcha.
At the time. I had been to New York. I had, had hot dogs, at the World Trade Center. So it was a familiar area to me as well. Yeah, I wasn't in New York or DC at the time. I was in Austin.
Well, I asked that question because September 11th, 2001, I was in the Pentagon. I was in the center ring of the Pentagon, and I can remember my CRT monitor jumping about 2 feet off my desk. And I also remember the quiet that followed immediately. And I got my young self up. I walked to the front door and I looked to the right, and that entire corridor was full of just black smoke. And this lady ran out and she was like, "Go, run." And I turned around. I looked back into my office and went to walk back in there. And I remember officers asking, "What should we do? Should we close the door? Should we do this?" And I was terrified. Like, they had no idea, I thought, about what was going on in our building. And John, I'm supposed to be trained to act with precision in distress. I turned around, I ran out into the center courtyard, and I eventually made it to my barracks. But I was trained, I was ready, but I failed. And when we got back to the building and we tried to get back to work and do, normal operations, I was reminded that I did not follow my military requirements, my standard operations procedures. I didn't do my battle rhythm, all the stuff that you're supposed to be able to do regardless of what disaster you're facing. So I had to do a presentation to my team. So I had to write a presentation, present it to my team, and then I had to walk them through the rally point and everything. Because, John, when I left, I didn't take keys. I didn't take my ID card. I didn't know the phone number to anybody in my chain of command, so I didn't know who to contact. Did I mention I didn't take my phone? None of those things. I couldn't think of any of it, regardless of how much training I was supposed to have. And if there's anything I can say is that something that followed me throughout my entire military history, and even is still with me today, is that you have to rehearse. You have to be prepared. You have to have standard operation procedures with you, because when you face the unthinkable, and for cybersecurity practitioners, the unthinkable could be a cyber attack, but it could also be, the same type of disaster that we faced on that day. It's important to try and find a way to make sure everything is ingrained in your system, it's in your practices. So when you think about playbooks too, because that translates to your playbooks, people in tech aren't often excited about writing out SOPs and making sure those are in place. They aren't always excited about creating the playbooks and making sure that you have a diagram maybe that shows you how to get from point A to point B, making sure that we have systems in place to communicate with vendors, with partners, with the total chain of command if necessary. And how do you make sure that everybody can communicate? Is it going to be from phones? Is it going to be from email? Is it all of those things? They'll never leave me. That's probably one of the biggest things that sticks with me.
No, I mean, I think I'll tell you, next time I talk about the need to train and rehearse and make sure that we do tabletops and do those things, I'm going to take your story with me. I'm going to tell people about your experience, because I think that the only thing that I have that's even close is an experience I had in Japan in 2011 after there was a earthquake off the coast of Japan, because I was in Japan at the time. And and I remember the tsunamis and watching it on the news and everything else. And luckily we weren't impacted directly, but I do remember seeing like people just filing out through the halls and trying to figure out what was going on, and loss of communication, and, phones didn't work. Everything was kind of like, it's like, what do we do? Right. And I was actually on a military base at that time. But yeah, those kinds of experiences kind of do ingrain in you the necessary, like, and like an incident response plans that I have today, I know we document what the chain of command is, right? And who has authority to make a decision about this, particular activity. But I don't think that today we rehearse enough. We don't do enough tabletops, and we don't do enough training on what to do when a disaster strikes, right? And I think that complacency doesn't feel real, right? Until, something like you experienced happened. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. I can imagine how that would change how I think about going into any situation. For sure.
Yeah.
So, wow, that's incredible. Yeah, like I said, I was kind of dumbstruck sitting at home on 9/11 and not knowing what decisions to make. And I was far, far away. But again, we didn't know how far away anything was at the beginning of the day. But it's a good reminder of, be prepared.
Yeah, you don't want to be in the middle of a ransomware attack or a malware attack, and now all of a sudden you're like, did we write this up? That's definitely not the time to try and figure out what you're supposed to do. So.
Exactly. And I've definitely been in situations where there have been attacks. The way that, financial institutions and, technology companies and even manufacturing companies or telcos, how they kind of assess like what the real world impacts are to them and what happens in the military are two completely different levels of stress, I would say, or what these failures are. What the impacts of failure is. Somewhat different in the military, but a lot of those same practices that we learned, like me working with the military for so many years, and what you learned being in the military at the Pentagon and 9/11, you see where being prepared helps, or having those actions. And then, like, for me, I feel like I've been drilled on so many things. Like even when I drive today, I'm ready for a defensive driving, right? It's like, anti-terrorism training. It's like, I'm ready to move off somewhere else. And just because I've had that training so many times, especially working overseas, it feels like every time I come to a stoplight or I come somewhere else that I'm ready to take an action if I have to. I would hope that my security teams know what to do in those actions as well, but it's better to test them and rehearse it than it is to hope that everyone has a plan. Wow, that's a really good,
Yeah.
impactful story, Tiffany. Not something I was prepared to talk about today. Uh, but
Yeah.
no, I think that
I guess that's kind of the way it is in incident response, right?
absolutely, absolutely, it is just like that. I mean, again, I remember training my teams, and me and another guy that used to work for me. We actually would start an exercise, and during the exercise we would know about what time the alert that we were expecting to have happened, and then we would leave the SOC, right? And we would like leave
Mhm.
because he was like the next manager, then I was the manager of the managers, right? And and so we would leave, and we would see how long does it take for them to respond. How long is it till they escalate? Did they know how to get in touch with us? And what do they do if that failed? And definitely something that you want to rehearse, because I've definitely had failures where in the middle of the night my incident response team didn't get the actions that they expected from the IT team, because they were working out of India and they were trying to get the IT team involved. And it's like super early in the morning. And then I get up at like 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and I get my update from them. And they said, no, John, we didn't get IT to help. We had one computer that was compromised at 11 p.m. when I talked to you, but now it's 24. It's like, what? Why
Oh
didn't you call
man.
me earlier? You know,
Yeah.
and then it's fire. Then it's a real firefight. Then the firefight got worse, right? And so, how do you escalate? When do you say that this isn't working, and then you're going to escalate again, right? I think that
Mhm.
those kind of questions need to be answered. And again, hopefully those questions are answered and you're prepared before you get into it, not when you're actually doing the fight, right? So good conversation. Good conversation. I'm going to transition a little bit. Incidents occur, and I think a lot of folks feel like they're somewhat linear in nature, right? Linear meaning that you can just follow the kill chain and the attacker goes step by step by step by step, and they get into your network. Folks don't really realize that the actions that they take every single day, whether they're patching, whether they're reacting to phishing emails correctly, whether they're clicking the MFA button on their phone, all these kind of actions that they take. In some cases, the absence of an action like patching kind of sets up your environment. Your environment changes every single day. And what attacks are happening against your user population and your engineering population happening every day. And we're kind of changing this landscape every single day by either action or inaction. Hopefully we're moving our security posture up. But we still have to balance the user experience with our, and how do we work with our consumers. I think there's a challenge where the business is trying to balance features and capabilities and delivering services to our customers with new features that are coming online, or as our developers and engineering teams are developing new features or new capabilities for our users inside the company as well. How do you balance the security between the user experience for so many consumer users and what you need to do to be prepared?
Users and what they want versus us as a security team, basically, right?
Yeah.
I think you have to come at it from a perspective of, you're also a user.
Yeah.
So you're going to start understanding kind of your friction points when you're using an app, right? So my early days when I was in human resources, because got to go back to human resources and memory, but my early days in human resources, I went into an office and I found out some people were using a proxy. Now I was HR, so I didn't know what a proxy was. I saw some random numbers in their configurations and then a little website. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, is that why you can use Yahoo Chat and get to your own email where you are and I can't get to it from my desk? But to fast forward to working in cybersecurity, and then I get into a discussion where they're talking about how a user was trying to circumvent controls by maybe accessing their Dropbox from the computer system because they couldn't email themselves from their classified email or their
Right.
unclassified email rather, right? So you're always going to run into this us versus them. And I think the best way to balance it is by trying to use those tools as well and then understanding where the friction points are. Like if we're talking about web, because this is where it became real to me, is understanding the motivations behind people circumventing controls in the web. We use content filters on many browsers right now. And those content filters can sometimes filter out sites that users might need to use. Maybe it's for school or something. And on my lunch break, this is what I do. Regardless of what it is, I think giving people the ability to bring their concerns to the security teams. There's possibly the what do you call them, the trouble tickets. I'm like, what do you call them? The trouble tickets. Giving people an option to use maybe a process to send something up to the security teams to request request a site to be on an allow list because they need it, and the security team didn't realize, like, oh, the npm package manager is necessary, but we're using something else. So just kind of being able to understand from the perspective of the users might be helpful. That was a lot. I don't know.
No, for sure. I think that our world has become more complicated over the last 20 years, right? Because I mean, I have a very similar experience, when I was at JP Morgan Chase. And the SOC was responsible for doing the proxy filters, right? And what was allowed and what was not allowed to go through, our systems. Mm-hmm. And we got lots of requests for, this site to be recategorized from this to something else. This is a news site. It's not a porn site or whatever, and so, or it's uncategorized and they want it to be categorized as whatever it was. That might be a better mm-hmm. example. It created a lot of tickets for my security operations center, right? So you can imagine. Yeah. And people that are just trying to do their jobs, like, because they're trying to do know your customer kind of activities. And this new person who came into the bank to open up a business account, they have a website, but they can't go to the website and check to see that it's a legitimate website because it's an uncategorized website because it's a new business. I mean, just imagine that. Mm-hmm. In all essence, the security team is stopping the opening of a checking account, right? Which is bread and butter to the business. Being able to understand that, hey, this is a problem and be able to count them in tickets, trouble tickets or whatever, however you want to categorize the tickets. You need to start understanding that you're impacting that user community and you're stopping them from doing their job, which is also stopping the business from making money, I would say, right, in the long run. I think that understanding those problems and then finding solutions around them, I think that we had a different way of doing it like 20 years ago. I think today, and at that time, we had our own data centers and we had our own offices. And this is very much like my experience with the military too, is that we had our own little data centers and places that we had our servers and we had places where people worked on bases. And we didn't use any SaaS products, right? And then all the applications we used were, most of the communication was happening through email. And then we were using some application to get to something else, right? Whether it's a Java mm-hmm. or whatever, kind of fat apps that were happening on the desktops. I think the world has changed largely for the better, I think, for most people. And we have a lot of more capabilities that are able to. But I think that user experience, like understanding where it is and understanding where your friction points are, being able to find other solutions. I think we just didn't have as many solutions 20 years ago that we have today. What I worry about is that the controls that we had in place in our legacy models or traditional models for data centers, like pre-COVID, the world's kind of somewhat changed, and we've kind of moved into this world where, everything's being delivered on the cloud via SaaS apps through a browser today. And our controls really haven't caught up. And just that example of like Dropbox and someone trying to get to the Dropbox. And I remember when I was working with the military in Bahrain in the Middle East, that people would go from a deployment on a terrestrial system, right? And they would go to an aircraft carrier and they would want their files to come with them. And the only way that they could send the files, classified files, was to Yahoo Mail, so they could move it between the different systems, right? So they could go from one classified system to another classified system, right? So they had USB as an option, which wasn't allowed. And then somehow mm-hmm. they would get the classified files on a USB stick or something, right? And then somehow get it so they could traverse it on an unclassified network, right? So they could put it back on the classified network on a ship. Boom. Oh man, there were so many.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen this happen before, but I mean, it was a terrible situation. But we're doing security, and that's good. But there was a legitimate reason why that person wanted to take those files from one place to another place. But the truth is that we didn't have a solution for it. So users invariably are going to try to find a solution to the problem that they're having. And it may not be the solution that the security team wants them to use.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if we're not learning, right, if it's just a punishment kind of environment where someone did something they're not supposed to do, and we don't want them to do that, I think that if you punish them for those activities, you're going to see less, right? Because they don't have a relationship with the security team or with the IT team that allows them to express what it is that they have a need to do, right? Because now they're going to hide it. As opposed to if you see what your users are doing and you try to understand, why do you want to go to this website? Or why are you using Dropbox? Why are you using a proxy server to do these activities? I think that they may have a legitimate reason for doing it, or there is a legitimate reason hiding in it. But if we're somewhat blind to those activities and we don't ask questions, I think it's harder for us as a security team to be part of the solution.
It is. Yeah. You mentioned a moment ago that solution in order to be able to move files from one network classification to the other. And, I made a transition. So maybe when you were dealing with that with people in the Navy, they didn't have the solution. But what I can tell you is once I started working in IT and I was working there in the Security Operations Center, which wasn't too long ago, there was a solution. We had a standard process in order to send those files to a location. They were reviewed, and then those files were sent to us on another classification. And so you're right. Somebody had to, somewhere along the line, start listening to what the problem was and finding a true solution. And if we're not willing to do that, if we're not willing to listen to the people on our team and our stakeholders, we're always, I think, going to be behind in terms of people's desire to access the things they need and their willingness to, or motivation to circumvent the controls.
Agreed. Well, with so much operations now happening through the browser, how significant is browser security in your security programs today? I mean, it's somewhat different. I mean, again, we came from a world, I think, where we had our own data centers and we had our own offices that we worked in. And now we're kind of using a lot of SaaS programs. SaaS apps are being delivered to us more today, whether it's M365 or Google Workspace, and that's where you get your mail in your office. The number of apps that are being delivered through the browser today has increased dramatically over the last, 10, 15 years. How significant has that been to your security program today?
What do you mean, John? Nobody uses the web browser.
Right. Yeah. No one protects it. Most people aren't protecting it, but if you just watch your users and where they're working, I think you'd see that they're using the browsers a lot today.
Yeah, for everything. So they're uploading stuff, they're downloading things to their computer systems. Look, I know personally, I have at least 2 web extensions that I've added to my browser, and they have an extensive amount of privileges. And I know full well the risks. And I went ahead and clicked it and accepted it. Now, they were known vendors. I didn't just randomly grab something, and they weren't web extensions that weren't, I'll say, approved. However, just knowing you have to read what those extensions are.
So you were saying that you have a couple of web extensions from known vendors, vendors that you probably trust. I think what you're seeing is that extensions are just like applications on your desktop or 10, 15 years ago. And it used to be that you couldn't just install whatever application you wanted onto your desktop. You actually had to go through IT. They had to approve it. They packaged it up and delivered it to you. Whereas today, our users have a different experience where they can just take their mobile phone, go to the Apple App Store, download apps to their phone, and no one's the wiser. And our browsers have app stores too, and people are just able to go to the web stores and just add software to their browsers. And as you were saying, there's a list of permissions that they're asking for before they go on your browsers. And they may be asking for highly privileged access to your browser. And you're seeing that as a problem. You're seeing that too.
I am, right? Because I work in security. So I understand that adding this browser extension to my system, it'll say right there in plain English, oh, thanks. If you allow me access, I can read everything that you have on your system. I can write to it. I can delete it. And we say yes because, I need this functionality. This is something that's going to help make me more productive during the day, whether it's for a calendar app or whatever it may be. I'm hoping that this isn't something that is immediately implemented in organizations, but we have AI browsers that are being created. And so when I think about now I have this Chrome extension that's on a browser that has AI, and we know for a fact, like the security is well behind the AI. So now I have a browser that can take action based on some commands that somebody has sent to the browser. And I've already given my browser extension God privileges.
Right.
So it's extremely important. I'm actually going to school right now. And the other day I was talking to one of my classmates, and he said, because we were talking about supply chain compromises, and he said that he didn't know anything about it. And usually what he would do is go and he would search the web, and he would find a package manager, and he would read and find the statistics on which package was installed the most. And he would just click install and go. And he doesn't have the training. That 1 month a year of cybersecurity training isn't enough for him to know what we know. So,
yeah, for sure.
It's
for sure. And we're talking about just extensions being added and what privileges they're asking for, right? And then there's also OAuth consents with like SaaS apps. Like you go and you say, okay, I'm going to connect my Google account with this other account, and it's going to ask for privileges where it can read all your Drive and everything else, and Google Drive and your Google Docs and everything else, and you're giving it permissions to read your email and write emails on your behalf. And again, users are trying to get stuff done, and they're going to be looking for tools to help them get those things done. And I think the browser AI agents, the AI browsers, and the extensions that put AI in your browser are kind of the same problem for me. And largely the way that I'm thinking about it, because those systems are using your identity. So they have when they go and they say, if you say browser AI agent, look for an email and summarize all my expenses in the last week, that AI agent is going into your mail account as you, and it's doing its work. And if you tell it to do something outside and say, go do some research and find a package, the software that is the most used, for this activity I want to do, like your colleague at school was, doing, and that's how they make decisions on what software to install. You can have your AI agent do the same thing. And again, those AI agents also don't have any security training, and they're enthusiastically going to go and try to go do that work for you on your behalf using your identity. And it could invariably lead you to, some trouble, right? I think when the trouble arises and there's problems in companies, I won't be surprised that it happened because of an AI agent. It will feel obvious that was going to happen from my perspective. But I think that the amount of work that we do in browsers today is so much greater than we've done anywhere. And we also have less and less visibility on what's happening between the browser and the SaaS apps and what actions people are doing inside those browsers so that we can control them. Yeah, definitely significant threat vector. Control extensions, control OAuth, put guardrails around your users. If they're using browser AI agents, then those guardrails should be able to help them control what access the AI agents have access to as well. So if you're going to stop people from using random SaaS apps on the internet, software like SquareX that can help you control that. But
Yes.
there are controls out there. People should be looking into them. It is a big vector, I think, today.
Speaking of SquareX, I love the email feature.
Okay. So you've been running the Stats on Stats podcast for some time now. What's been the most rewarding aspect of it? And what's the most memorable lesson you've learned from your guests? Like for me, I learned so much from my guests. I think that's been one of the more rewarding aspects of hosting a podcast on my side. I imagine it's somewhat similar for you too.
What you'll hear often on our podcast is when we were thinking about starting the podcast, it always, to me, one of the things I thought about was being able to help my nephews, nieces kind of understand what we do in tech and why it truly matters. Initially, that's kind of where my vision was the community that was closest to me. And trying to be able to provide more resources to them. Well, with the podcast, we have casual conversations with tech professionals and at varying levels and various roles within cybersecurity. And we're able to use these discussions to provide resources, to provide connections, to provide inspiration to people who are having challenges, who are trying to figure out if they're going in the right direction, maybe even have questions about making transitions to different roles. And it's not just my personal community anymore. It's beyond the people that I knew and cared about and wanted to be able to provide resources to originally. We went to DEF CON. This year in August, we went to DEF CON. And while we were at DEF CON, a young lady came up to where we were setting up to do our interviews. And she walked over and said, "You know what, Jordan," my podcast co-host, "You know what, Jordan? One day I heard you say that you continue to come back to this podcast and keep going because you believe maybe there's somebody that's listening who just continue because of the discussions we're having." And she didn't have to do that. She really didn't. But it really made it real that what we're doing was impacting people, and it was bigger than I could have imagined from day one. So that continues to be rewarding, and it's motivational. It keeps both of us going. And then the most memorable lesson I've learned from my guests, for me personally, probably one of the most memorable has been just to keep showing up. Because in the very beginning, I don't know if you watched the show, but in the very beginning, the first couple of episodes, probably the whole first season, if I think about it, the whole first season, you can tell that I'm extremely uncomfortable, or I think you can tell I'm extremely uncomfortable. But we've had many people come on the show who say, what does it matter if you feel like you're failing at what you're doing at your podcast? You're showing up, you're doing it whether you're afraid, you continue to show up, you work through your challenges that you have. So there is so many people that have come on the podcast and said, you don't have to show up and be perfect immediately. And you can still help people. You can still be able to provide some inspiration to the people who are having maybe some of the same struggles that you have. And then I'm learning. Like you said, you're learning. I'm learning. I go to Toastmasters now. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Toastmasters, but I attend Toastmasters, and I'm also learning communication skills. So you're asking me to pick, I guess, one or two, but I always felt like there's so many.
No, I think it's good. It's a good answer. I think that for me, for sure, like on my side, it's very much the same. It's definitely uncomfortable. This is not what I do. In my continuing to do it, I've become more comfortable. And I think that that's important for people to understand. It's about showing up. It is about showing up, and you keep trying. It's okay if you fail. We got to fail a lot, I think, before we can feel like we're successful, right? We got to get through those kinds of feelings. So I think it's a really good advice. I think I talked about this on your podcast as well, is that as you move up through beginning journey until you start managing people and you start leading groups and big groups or whatever, you're going to continually find yourself in a position where you're uncomfortable. You're going to have to do things that role requires you to do X or Y or Z. And those are invariably going to be things that you don't know how to do, right? That it's going to be the first time that you're doing it. And are you going to fail? Hopefully not catastrophically, but it's likely you're going to have a lot of opportunity to be better. And I think you just have to keep grinding through that work so that you can build competence. Competence doesn't just come to anybody. You're going to run into challenges on your career path that you're going to have to push through and get better at. And I think it's great advice from you. Separately, for veterans looking to transition into cybersecurity, what's your one piece of advice you'd give them about making that career shift? And conversely, what would you give to a cybersecurity professionals who want to get an educational podcasting role like yourself?
Oh, gosh. Let me see. You're trying to break that down. So military, submit a trouble ticket, because when that help desk person comes over to help you, they are going to be maybe the first person in your network that you get to ask questions about what led them there. What schools or classes did they take? What certifications did they need to take? And then you could also ask them about, because there's always local meetups. There are meetups around the globe, conferences around the globe that you could attend to start learning more about the tech space. So I think, would be your first place to start asking questions is, hey, now that you're here. So that's that. And then after asking your help desk person, start looking at, there's so much free stuff online. So start following, let's see, The Other Side of the Firewall, the Tech Woke podcast, CyberWox, WOX, or just look up Day Johnson. You'll find them. Black Hills Information Security, Stats on Stats podcast. Do that as well. Tyler Ramsby, Network Chuck. I'm trying to think of as many as I can, but free resources, people who actually care and also have communities that they've built that you can join their Discord. You can ask as many questions as you want from there. So once you start listening to some of those podcasts and following them, you'll start to learn more about roles that are available in cybersecurity, probably some things that you hadn't even been introduced to. And then start attending some of those events that you're learning about or those conferences. But you'll be able to expand your network beyond the help desk person that you initially called to your desk because you broke something or you were a little frustrated. And then what was the other part of it?
If you're a cybersecurity professional, you want to get into educational podcasting like you're doing, do you have any advice for them to get started?
If you have to do it afraid. When we started, it was just me, Jordan, and an idea that we wanted to be able to provide resources to people, but we didn't want it to be stiff. We wanted people to just be able to come on, have fun, enjoy themselves, just like they would at a barbecue or an ice cream shop or, just out with your friends. And we hope that we can show, or we've shown with our podcast, that you just have to bring yourself, be really unique. You can pull out a phone and start recording anywhere that makes you feel safe and feel comfortable. And you'll find your crowd. That much I know.
Awesome advice. Tiffiny, thanks for being on the Be Fearless podcast. It was great hosting you here.
Thank you so much for having me, John. I really appreciate it.